Additionally, I hope that I'm not going to be interrupted at any point and I can just keep on going. That may happen. People tend to come and knock on the door, unexpected moments. Anyway, so I've got two 6mm scale Battletech models. Now, what I've been doing as a recap, so essentially they're the same model. They're a Raven, I believe a sort of scout light mech. I've put different sort of weapon pods on the side than normally come with these. This one's got this sort of thing that looks a bit like a flamer, and this one's got a couple of extra components weapon-wise on the side that I've added. And I've used the live colour pigments on them. And one thing, the reason this one is shinier than the other one is that before I put the pigments on, I used some gloss varnish. In fact, I used this gloss varnish, which is Games Workshop's Ard Coat, just because it's convenient. Easy to use gloss paint, and it saves me having to airbrush it on. I just painted it all over and then I did all the washing. This one, which also had the life colour pigments, which are these washes, they're kind of washes, but you can remove them, non-smelling washes that can be removed. And so I did that on this one, but I hadn't actually properly glossed it. I hadn't glossed it at all, so the challenge was that when I tried to remove some of that to leave it behind in the panel lines, it stained the sandy areas with the green wash, so it ended up looking a little bit odd, but I'm quite happy with it all the same. It did go into the, if I can find something to point here, it did go quite nicely into sections like this one here. You can see the wash is sunk in. This one you can't see that effect at all, and it looks a lot more even because the gloss is sort of counteracting any effect that you're getting from the wash in the detail. It is on there, but you can't really see it because the gloss is shiny. So what I'm going to do now, because I've sort of finished them, I was only sort of doing these tabletop standard, so I'm going to matte coat them to sort of finish them off essentially, and just give you a sort of above view there. There you go. Oh, and since the last video I did use a grey on the weaponry on this one, and I also used the wash on those grey areas. So to help that wash, I did actually use that gloss coat on these weapons as well, so they're a bit glossy, unlike the one on the right there, which has got completely glossed from top to bottom. So what I've got is I've got so many matte varnishes over the year that I've bought from Vallejo, Games Workshop, and typically I use a spray can, but since I'm sort of doing this on camera, I'm going to use this artist's acrylic matte varnish, and just try and sort out this camera because it's moving all over the place. Apologies. That's better. So I'm going to do my typical trick, which is what I do, which is I decant some of that paint, well in this case varnish. I'm just going to decant that onto my wet palette over here, which is just out of sight of the camera. And then squirt some of that out. So in fact I've got a small brush out here which I don't really need. I need a big brush, so I'm going to use this one. So this is a what size is this? Size 6 graduate brush by De Laroni, and it's just got a really big end. A big end. It's got a big brush, lots of bristles, and I'm going to rinse that out first as well. So it's actually now quite moist as well, and ready to take some of this varnish, which I'm going to be quite liberal with really. And at the end of this, obviously, we should then also see the result on this model in terms of, you know, how is the ink looking now that it's sort of painted up in matte rather than gloss. I'm not having to get as close into this as I normally do because obviously when you just matte dull coating something, you don't need to worry too much about getting to all the detail, and I'm able to sort of work around it. The one thing to do is that when dull coat like this starts to dry, you want to leave it to properly dry really before putting on a second coat, otherwise you'll end up with sort of blotchy bits where it's half dried and you're sort of pulling off the paint rather than putting it back on. Oh, that was great. And here we go, just a bit on the side. And again, it doesn't matter if I've missed any because I can come back on later. And this other one does need it on the weapons. In fact, I think I put some on the visor, cockpit glass, canopy, however you want to call it. I think I'd put gloss on there as well. And obviously it serves to protect the model too, so I'm going to go over everything on there. And the other nice thing about if you have used gloss before you're putting a wash on, you do get the benefit of being able to see where you've missed with the matte dull coat, because you'll be able to look back and see any shiny bits still and go, aha, I need to go back onto that. So that will probably do for now on that one. I'll rinse the brush out, and while they're sort of drying there, I'll show you what paint I used on the dirt and sand on the base. I try and standardise on this for all my painting actually, and it's Tamiya XF52 Flat Earth, and it's a really good solid brown. It's a great base in that it's not too dark. It thins up nicely. In fact, I tend to use alcohol thinners with it because it's one of these Tamiya acrylics that it doesn't thin with water, but you get a great solid base, and I've been using it on almost everything I've been painting recently because it spreads nice and thin and just great coverage for base work. And I like to have a standard as well, so I'm trying to find a colour now that might be the grade up, so possibly that one, to do a dry brush across that desert sand base. And for this I'm going to use this GW brush. It's for dry work. I think it's a new range that they do, and as you can see it has quite a nice sort of rough looking thick bristly brush at the end. So I'm going to do the classic dry brush, which is everybody mostly knows, which is just to sort of run the wet paint backwards and forwards on there until there's not much left on the brush, and then move to this base. In fact, it's not a massive leap up forward in terms of shading on what's on there already, but it's enough to be a nice grade up, and then I'll use a sandy colour afterwards to finish it off. Obviously the other thing these bases need is they do need some static graphs or some tufts, and I have tufts, but I haven't got them out ready for this live stream, so I'm not going to do that stage. I'm just going to get this done. So there I've gone on. This time I didn't rub off as much of the paint from the brush for the dry brushing, so it's going on a slightly heavier coat. And here you can actually, obviously the paint is drying in terms of that that dull coat matte varnish that I've put on there. Well, I can see it slowly drying. There's a possibility that the second model over there may need some more matte dull coat on it to completely dull down the gloss that was on there. The one thing with sort of dry brushing really is that you can just keep on doing it until you're sort of happy. I just touched the model there, which I didn't want to do, but only very slightly. You can just keep on going with dry brushing in that, you know, by the time you've done sort of 10-15 strokes of the across here, there's not much paint left, but so you're not going to do anything wrong, but at the same time you will sort of be doing a steady build up. I mean, everybody knows dry brushing really. It's kind of old school. There you go again. This time I didn't rub off as much to get more coverage of this tone. Yeah, what I liked actually about doing the guns, I know it wouldn't be traditional for military style to necessarily do the weaponry in a different colour, because it sort of ruins the camo silhouette, breaking up the silhouette effect and makes it more distinctive, but it still kind of looks sort of hard sci-fi looking. I've not sort of highlighted it up to the extreme or anything like that, which is kind of can be quite fashionable in the Battletech world. In fact, I used to do that all the time myself, which is extreme highlighted panels and details, and they can look, I guess they start looking a bit sort of candy-like, can't they, especially if they're bright colours. So yeah, I mean, I'm just talking and dry brushing here and building up the dry brush as I go until I see it looking kind of right, and also jumping from one model to the other, which is classic for me, instead of just focusing on one bit. Yeah, this one looks like it's dulled down quite nicely in terms of what the dull coat's done to it. Yeah, again, that dull coat I was using was this Artist's Acrylic Matte UV Varnish, protects your art. Yeah, this is one thing. Sometimes, actually an interesting note to make is that when you cross over from one hobby to another, or another sort of area of expertise, things can sometimes sort of drop in price. So for example, if you were to get a small Games Workshop pot of matte paint, it probably cost you £2.85, £3, but you'd only get a pot about this size, you know, one of these small tiny pots. If you pop along to your local craft store and pick up some matte varnish like this, it might be £5, but you get like 20 times as much, and it'll last you forever, than if you bought it from specifically a War Games painting range, where they only give us tiny amounts in small pots and are making a killing on it. Yeah, quite happy with that. It's actually not a massive tone up on the base colour. I'm using this deposited dust colour from Life Colour, and I'm going to then go on after that with their colour called Sand. I've got in just about every language on the front of that pot. So now I've wet that brush, it's not going to be as good for dry brushing, but I will now get in there with the sand. The one thing I'm not doing with the sand is putting it on my wet palette, because I don't need it to stay wet. That's when you're dry brushing, all you really need to do is take it out of the pot and then dry brush into your tissue. One thing I could do on these bases is I could use some of the pigments again. I may do, I may not. Not on this video anyway, but because I just wanted to see the finished result. So, come in there again with my finger to move it around in front of the camera, which is quite difficult. I'm just praying, as I normally do, that the that the sound is working. So I've gone on quite heavy there. But it's not the end of the world if you do. I've gone quiet, sorry. Not got much to talk about, just doing this dry brushing and watching the paint dry at the same time. Well, the varnish dry. It's difficult to know whether these are actually coming out looking any good on the camera, because they look quite subtle and interesting from where I am, but do they look any good on camera? I don't know. No, they don't really. Yeah, it's funny that I can see more tones and difference in them from my view. Camera's not picking every detail up. Too far out there. Yeah, that one's still looking like there's still quite a lot of gloss areas that I didn't cover. Whereas that's nicely dulled out now. Yes. So what I might do is put some washes on the base. Just some. What have I got over here? I've got some interesting. This is a life colour range, and I've started to tidy my paints up again, trying to improve my workflow a bit to incorporate all my paints along the front, so that if I'm doing a live stream like this, I can get to what I need and not spend 5 minutes digging around. But this is a life colour range called, which is a rust range that they did, and they do like a rust base colour you put on, and then sort of goes up through oranges and also a dark shade too, and it can look quite effective. But there's also in there what they call their tens no chrome ranges, which are like a thin wash in the appropriate colour. So if I get that out, you can sort of see what it is. It's very thin, kind of grimy stuff, but could be quite interesting just to sort of bring out, who knows what planet these guys are on, but you can just put a bit in there on the base, just to sort of bring out some details underneath rocks and things. Obviously it's going on wet, but it's not. It's going to dry completely matte. And around the back there as well, maybe. And once that's dry, it just sort of breaks up the monotony of having a single plane base. It's just a quick trick. Doesn't take any time to do. Oh, there's another one of the rust light shadow. So that's the full range of the rusts. I'm trying to keep them together because Life Colour do nice sets like this. So I've got over here another range they do where you have flesh shadow. So if I'm doing figure style miniatures, they do a whole range of these nice flesh ones as well. So you have a shadow colour, you have a light flesh colour, and they do it in one set. So you can very quickly work through those. Yeah, so just while that's drying, I will step up and see if I can get another Battletech miniature of mine out of the cupboard. Move these to the back while they're drying. This one was sort of, when did I do that? About 2002, 2001. So it's when I came back to Battletech again, because I used to play in the early 90s, and then I sort of got back into it in the early 2000s, a decade on. When I came back to it, I was doing milliput style basing, so sticking things in there, making little bushes and putting little old wheels and things on there using milliput. And also I was in this extreme painting mode where I was doing, highlighted panels up on every edge. Even like I wanted a horizon in the cockpit glass there. I think that's a Gauss cannon. Can't even remember the model actually. I know this one's a Caesar. In fact, this Caesar actually I didn't spend as much time on the panelling as perhaps this guy here when I was getting back into painting. It's not, you know, I don't really like this style. I mean, they're nice, but I don't like this style as much as I used to, going to that sort of almost neon style of highlighting. And then you can see on this Caesar, I was a bit of a crazy fool on the glass there. In fact, that's painted in a gloss, which you can see has the shine, but I also painted shine dots on there and a white bar down the front to make it look like a pilot was behind the glass in there. So that's all hand painted. I don't know how close I can get before it gets a bit blurry. That's a decal on the side there from Fighting Piranha Graphics. And then I made the sort of weapons look as if they were hot by painting them up, and the arms and sort of hot looking joints on there. I don't know why I did that. But it hasn't got as extreme a painting style as this, and it was probably a few years later when I was doing that. Now, of course, I tend to go for the more sort of naturalistic looking armour style, like these guys, sort of less glow in the dark and more just a sort of natural, quick paint job to do for the tabletop. So, interestingly enough, this is sort of still a little bit glossy, really. I think it probably needs a second dull coat, but I'm quite happy with the result for the camo and the way the washes have worked out on there. Yeah, I mean, it was an experiment. I also seem to remember just before I finished them, I kind of did a kind of little sprinkling of mud sort of on them, on the back, a sort of use of a brown. Yeah, that's still looking a bit gloss. It probably just needs a second dull coat just across the top, or a spray job. Yeah, they're not looking too bad. Oh, I've got caught up with my Caesar. So yeah, that's my old style, and this tends to be what I do now, which is a bit quicker and easier to do. Less time consuming. But I can still paint like this. I mean, I was doing a guide recently on this tag for the Infinity game, and you know, I was taking that, you can see I was going into that sort of tiny edges and shining those up with very tiny highlights, as you can see, which is similar to how I was doing in the old days with these. Although the other thing that I did do with this is I physically painted on top this sort of staged shading. So if I've not got too much glow off the light, you can see I had the sort of feathering, and that's deliberately done when I did it, because I thought, oh, this will look like it's sort of a shiny central bar running through the top, and it does actually go to a very fine blue highlight strip through the middle to make it look like a shine on the panel. Again, that was just kind of experimenting when I did it. And I used Space Wolves colours. I think this is like a Space Wolves grey, and then the highlight up to blue as well. So yeah. Well, that's it. I'm not going to do much more on these, apart from these two guys will get static grass on the bases. You can see that that rust style wash has gone on there quite nicely. It's drying out now, and overall quite sort of happy with the result. Obviously you're in quite close during the game, they're a little bit further away. Back over to have a look at these things. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, nearly finished. Like I said, what I'm going to probably do next is just do some tufts of grass on the base, and I have little static grass tufts stashed away somewhere. Then I might give them a whole dull coat with a can of spray using the Tester's dull coat just to finish them off completely. But there we go, that was just a short video, and thanks very much for listening in.